Hey guys, Poro here with my third of 5 videos in the top 20 players per role heading into 2026 series. This time I'm going to be doing mid lane. Just like the top lane and jungle list, this list is a personalized list that is mostly based on my opinions and who I'm excited for heading into 2026. This is not a list where I'm trying to rank who I thought were the best in 2025. It's more of a projection of who I think has the best chance to succeed in the coming years. I'm not going to do much for the intro this time, we're just going to get right into it. So first up, here are my list of honorable mentions from each of the 6 regions. These are all of the players who I considered for the list, who I briefly thought may be worthy of being in that top 20, but that I decided to pass on. So there are a lot of names here. The ones that I want to specifically mention would be, I think that Jojo is like right outside of that top 20. I think he has really good laning, but needs to work on some of the other facets of his game. I think you could also give a mention to a player like Loki, who I think is somebody who has a lot of potential, but the issue with Loki is that he is most likely not going to be playing next year, so I don't want to put him in top 20 because he's going to be missing a year of improvement even if he comes in split 2 or split 3 or something. I'll also give a shout out to Arya, who, even though DFM was a pretty terrible roster all year, I thought that Arya was still one of the best mid laners in LCP from start of 2025 to end of 2025, and that despite the bad condition he was in, he was always able to look good. And I guess I'll also mention Zinni, because I think that a lot of people are very excited for Zinni, and I am too. Based on what we've seen from LCKCL players in the past, we know that they turn out to be very good most of the time, but they are usually not great right out of the get-go. Like, usually there's some growing pains, and then they end up making massive leaps in year 2 and year 3. So I think that Zinni will be really good most likely, but just not yet. So with the honorable mentions out of the way, let's get right into the list. In 20th, I have Rookie, who is going to be the mid laner for IG. The IG roster itself is a little bit odd. Originally, IG's goal was to run it back. They wanted to re-sign everybody, the Shy, Mako, Rookie, Wei, Gala. And then what ended up happening is that they got the re-sign from Rookie and Wei, and they also got a re-sign from Mako. And then they thought that they were going to have to get Gala from the auction, and Gala did go to the auction, but IG were not able to secure him there. Then the Shy had some things where we weren't sure if he was going to resign, and then Mako said that even though he is resigning to IG, he wants to take a split off, so Mako will not be playing in split 1. So the split 1 IG roster, when the dust settled, looks a little bit weird. You have Soburo, Wei, Rookie, Photic, and Jue. So I would not be surprised if the roster ends up struggling, and as a result, Rookie ends up not doing that well. Rookie also was a player who was struggling to find meaningful impact for most of 2025. I think that in terms of his career, this was definitely his weakest year, at least out of the last, 8-9 years. This was for sure his worst individual year. I thought that he was struggling a lot to find mid-late game impact. I thought he was losing a lot of lanes. He, in recent years, 2022, 23, 24, Rookie has had moments where he still feels like a 1v9 carry, where he still feels like he's one of the best or the best players on his team, but 2025 was the first year where I was like, this is not it. Maybe Rookie is finally on the downswing. Maybe he doesn't have it in him anymore. But then IG went to Worlds, and despite everything that I thought was going to happen with Rookie, he actually played a very good series against Faker. A way better series than I thought that he was capable of. He had an Orianna game, for example, that I thought was amazing. Rookie is the greatest Orianna player of all time, but I was definitely not expecting to see a vintage Orianna performance against T1, and when we got that, I was really happy for him. So maybe that means that heading into 2026, he's still got a little bit of fire in him. He can still carry games, he can still play really well. So that's what I'm hoping for him, and I saw enough life out of him in that World Series that it made me want to put him in 20th over some of the more promising younger talents that barely missed the cutoff. But because of how inconsistent his entire 2025 was, I'm not going to push him up further. In 19th, I have Quid, who is the mid laner for TL. Quid is one of those aforementioned LCKCL talents, where in year 1, he wasn't amazing. Then in year 2, he took a nice leap. So year 1, he comes in to 100 Thieves. He shows flashes of being promising, but isn't necessarily amazing in lane. Then 100 Thieves end up going to Worlds. Quid looks really, really bad at that Worlds 2024. But then the year 2 jump was really nice. Quid ended up looking really strong for the majority of the year. By the end of the year, there was an argument that he was actually the best mid laner in the LCS, which is why I have him projected to be the best mid laner coming into 2026. It's interesting because there are a lot of players in the LCK and a lot of players in the LCK CL specialize in these stable champions and stable comps and trying to play the game out in the most consistent way possible. I think that a perfect example of that, who is also in the LCS, would be Quad. Quad is somebody who likes it when things in the game go the way that he expects them to go. His champion pool is mostly standard control mages with, his one screwball being Cassiopeia, but even the Cassio is still of the mage archetype and has some very standard matchups that most players will pick her into if they see the angle. Quid is not like that, and this is part of the reason why Quid was kind of a weird fit in his first year in the LCS. Quid likes to play more volatile champions, especially some of the melee carries like Yone and Akali and whatnot. He also has a pretty comfortable Sylas. And then so because of that, I think it took a little bit for the team to adapt around his playstyle, and for Quid himself to be able to figure out how he wants to win with those types of champions. But I really felt like it clicked this year, especially towards the back half when 100 Thieves made their miracle run to finish second in the LTA North. And then the one question mark I had for Quid was, okay, he had a really bad Worlds 2024 where 100 Thieves were losing to like LLA teams and stuff. How is Quid going to look at internationals? Is he just going to be the type of player who can never perform at an international? Like, is that the trajectory that he's going to be on? But at Worlds 2025, I was pretty happy with how he looked. I thought that he had a really nice Aurora game against BLG. I thought he had a nice Sylas game against T1. Overall, I thought that a lot of the players on 100 Thieves were kind of punching above their weight. So now that Quid is on TL, which is a little bit more of an established org, I feel like there are some players on that roster who are really promising. I like his prospects. I think he's going to be able to take another leap of improvement. Yeah, I'm excited to see what he's got. In 18th, I have Vladi, who is going to be the mid laner for Fnatic. He was previously the mid laner for KC, and if you're somebody who underrates Vladi, then what you're probably going to point out is the fact that towards the back half of the year, Vladi started to become very non-existent in games, very AFK, and his performance just dipped a lot. In Split 1, I thought that he was the best Western mid laner at the time, when Casey was heading to first stand. I thought he was super talented, probably the most promising player on his team at the time. But then, as the year progressed, it felt like he was slowly getting a little bit worse, and then by the time that we got to the end of the year, he was starting to collapse a bit. But then some stuff about Casey came out. We got to have a little bit of a look into what was going on behind the scenes internally in the back room. We saw that there were some issues with player chemistry, some issues with player health, some coaching issues. And then so because of that, everybody who is on that KC roster, I'm kind of giving them a little bit of a pass for the back half of their year, which obviously this could end up being a mistake. Maybe there's a chance that all of the players who were on that KC 2025 roster are just going to continue to struggle. When I'm thinking of the players on KC, I have in mind more of the upside that I was seeing from them in Split 1, so when I'm thinking of Vladi, I still view him as a very promising Western talent. I don't know if Fnatic's going to be the environment for him to improve that much. The Fnatic roster does look a little bit sketchy. They have a couple of rookies coming in who I don't really know anything about. They decided to keep Razork, so there are some question marks for me. There's a chance that Vladi just ends up rotting the whole year on Fnatic. If Vladi can take a nice, I guess we'll call it a year 3 jump, because he did play a little bit 2 years ago, but so yeah, year 3 jump. If we can see that, I think that he'll be really good. Like, if he ends up looking more like he did in Split 1 and then building off of that, I think that he'll be a very strong player, and I have high hopes for him. So that's why I have a little bit more faith in Vladi than some of the general audience. But I also think that it should be noted that basically the entire LEC offseason in terms of mid lane pool did stall out for weeks, basically, because no team actually wanted to confirm who their mid laner was, except for like G2. No team wanted to confirm who their mid laner was until they knew where Vladi was going. Vladi was like the big offseason domino, so clearly despite the Split 3 inconsistencies, most of the teams were kind of on the same page that I am, where they're still valuing his prospects very highly. In 17th, I have Calyx, who is going to be the backup mid laner for Nongshim. So he was on Nongshim last year, got playing time for most of the season. Now he is going to take a step back and play on the bench. Nongshim decided to assign Scout, and Scout was inconsistent in 2025, so for that reason, Nongshim wanted to keep Calyx around, just so that way they had a backup option. I did hear rumors that there were LCP teams who attempted to sign Calyx, but they couldn't make any of the deals work, and so Calyx ended up staying with Nongshim. Either way, I view Calyx as a very promising player. I thought that as soon as he came into Nongshim, I thought basically he was instantly better than Fisher. And even though Nongshim did have their disaster split 3, where they were losing pretty much every single game to every team in the upper group, I still thought that there were flashes of Calyx really being good, and I think that there is a chance that if he ends up getting some playing time, that he could make a big year 2 jump. Like, I think if Scout ends up working out in split 1 for Nongshim, then Nongshim will be more willing to part with Calyx, and then we'll get to see Calyx on a different team in split 2 or 3. He could probably find a spot on 2 or 3 separate LCK teams who have some weaker mid laners, or he could go to the LCP if the teams there are still asking for him. And then if Scout ends up stinking the same way that he did in 2025, maybe Calyx ends up being the starter for Nongshim again. So either way, I would be pretty surprised if we don't end up seeing Calyx play at least a little bit on some team, whether it's on Nongshim or a different team. And I think that he's the type of player who could really make a year 2 leap. In 16th, I have Angel. Most people who don't watch the LPL probably haven't heard about Angel since all the way back in 2020 when that Suning roster made it to Grand Finals. And back then, Angel was most notable for his Akali. He was a really good Akali back then. Since then, Angel has been bouncing around these middle of the pack or even lower tier LPL teams, but throughout all of that, I still think he's remained pretty solid. Most recently, he's been on EDG, and he's going to be with EDG heading into 2026. And the way that the LPL format worked was that the top 8 teams and I believe it's the top 8 teams and the bottom 6 teams split into 2 groups for split 3 based on their performance in the earlier splits. And EDG was in the lower group, but in that lower group they were extremely dominant. They basically spent the entire first half of split 3 going undefeated, and then in the back half of the split they were trading for the top spot with NIP. And both NIP and EDG were strong enough teams that they were able to contend with some of the lower tier teams in the upper group, and both teams were fighting for a playoff spot. So I think that EDG roster was pretty promising, and I would say that, in my opinion, the player who was most consistently a good player on that team was Angel. I view Angel as for sure going to be a reliable middle of the pack LPL mid laner, which is pretty much the same thing that he's been for the last 3 or 4 years. In 15th, I have Scout. So in my LCK rankings, I have Scout right next to Calyx, so regardless of who Nongshim ends up going with for that mid laner, I really don't care either way. I think that either mid laner could take it. There's upside for both, right? Calyx is a very new player, so we don't know how high his ceiling can get. And then the upside for Scout would be that even though Scout had a rough 2025, he has had years in recent memory where he's been like a super hyper elite mid laner. So for example, on 2023 LNG, I thought that Scout was an extremely strong player and was a big reason as to why that team was able to get all the way to grand finals of LPL. Then we got to Worlds, and despite LNG having a really dominant Swiss stage, they ended up choking pretty hard in quarterfinals. Some of that due to Tarzan, of course, but Scout also did not play well in that quarterfinals either. But basically, the idea that Scout can still be an elite mid laner is there. We aren't that far removed from it. And even though some people might view Scout's 2025 year as a sign that he's on the decline or he doesn't have it anymore, I do want to point out, I've mentioned this a couple of times, but I want to point out that Scout was involved in an out-of-game legal battle. So it had to do, it was like a lawsuit or somebody was suing somebody else. Basically, the general details was that Scout was contracted to a team, and part of that contract was, if you're going to look for opportunities in another team, you have to tell us. Then he signed with another team and didn't tell his original team, because the idea was that his original team wanted to be able to make a counter offer or match the offer before Scout left, but Scout left without telling them, and so they never had the chance to make the counter offer. They took him to court. That was a whole entire ordeal outside of the game. If I have it correct in my head, we're dealing with like millions of dollars here. In my opinion, I would view that as like an extremely stressful event for him. I would imagine that he would be losing out on a lot of scrim time and a lot of practice time, and that his mind would be split in different directions. So even though Scout was having a lot of performance-related issues in 2025, I've kind of said I'm willing to erase that year from my memory and see how he'll look in a different environment with a fresh slate, because his whole entire court battle thing is over now. He doesn't have to deal with that anymore. So now that he's going to have a year where he can go back to not needing to worry about things outside of the game, and then he can have full scrim time and full practice time, I want to see if he can get back to those highs that he was at in 2023. Like if this was 2023 Scout on a list like this, he would probably be pushing into top 5. And I don't think he's going to be top 5 right out of the gate, even like best case scenario. I do think that the potential is there for him to be on that trajectory. So I definitely can see the vision from Nongshim of wanting to sign him as this potentially high upside pickup. And I agree with the decision to at least initially start him over Calyx. So that is why I have him over Calyx in my mid list. Then in 14th, one of the biggest offseason moves, we have HoloCure, who is leaving CFO and is joining JDG in the LPL. He and Junja both left CFO together and are both joining this JDG roster, and based on the players on that roster, they should be expected to be qualifying for Worlds. They should be a team who is fighting for a top 4 spot. The rest of the team features Gala and Vampire, who is a super dominant bot duo, and then they also have top laner Xiaozhu, who, while I'm not as high on him as other people are, I understand that there are plenty of people who think that he's going to be the next big thing in the LPL. So if all of the pieces click for JDG, they should be a top team. Of course, there are a lot of question marks, and for me, one of those question marks is HoloCure. I'm a big believer in HoloCure. I spent the entire year watching him take massive improvements through the entirety of like every single split in LCP. He just got better and better. In split 1, I thought that he was fine. Then he goes to first stand, and while he doesn't look super comfortable, he's showing flashes of being potentially special. Then he goes back in split 2, he looks pretty solid, and then he goes to MSI and he has this breakout MSI performance where he looks great. Then he goes to split 3 and he made a big leap in split 3 domestically, where I just thought that he was a phenomenal player, 100% the best player in that region domestically. So heading into Worlds, I was super excited for him. I put him as high as 5th best mid laner in the tournament, and while that did end up being a little bit of a stretch, I don't think that HoloCure performed at the level of top 5 mid laner in the tournament. I do think that my excitement for him was real, and it was even possibly justified. However, the fact that he did not perform at Worlds as well as I wanted him to does leave me with some questions. I think that HoloCure's biggest strength is that he is an extremely creative player. He's always thinking about what picks he can go to find edges in a game. He was one of the players in the LCP who was piloting Swain whenever like there was a really good Swaining angle, for example. And he's also a player who is just very creative with the common meta champions. Like, I think that HoloCure's rise, the way that he uses Realm Warp he uses it in some of the most creative ways I've seen, even from top tier Rise players. So when I see qualities like that, it tells me that I feel like he's got something special in there. He's got something that sets him apart from other mid laners. But when he finally went up against some top tier elite level mid laners at Worlds, he did have some struggles in lane, and he did have some mistakes in mid and late game that was making it hard for his team to win. So whenever there's a player like that and they're moving into the LPL, I do worry. Like, I have HoloCure as 5th best LPL mid laner, so I'm projecting him to be a good mid laner in the LPL, but I do think that there is a non-zero chance that he goes to the LPL and he just collapses. I totally think that there's a reasonable chance that he just will not be able to lane against anybody in the region, and then he'll get maybe like 1-2 splits, and then he'll be sent right back to the LCP. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. I really hope that doesn't happen. I would love to see him fix up his laning and become a stable laner, and then he can show off his creativity, and that's how he can find edges over other players. But because I'm not 100% confident that that's going to be the case, I pushed him down way further than what my Worlds placement and what my domestic viewing experience would have suggested. In 13th, I have Caps, who is the mid laner for G2. Caps is somebody who, at any given moment, he can show up to an international tournament and be a top 5 player if he's in form. It is a big question of whether he's going to be in form or not. Sometimes he's playing really well, and sometimes he's not. He kind of goes back and forth. For example, in 2023, in the first half of 2023, I thought that he was very inconsistent. That was one of his low points. He went to MSI 23 and was probably the worst player on his team. But then he made a full recovery in 2024, and I thought he was fantastic at 2024 MSI and a top 3 mid laner at that tournament. So, you know, I never know what to expect from Caps. I think in 2025, he was definitely the best player on his team, at least at the international level. It felt like he was the only player on his team who was functioning at a reasonable capacity at MSI. I thought that he was one of the best players, or the best player on his team at Worlds. So Caps is somebody who I trust to play like himself internationally. I trust that he has it in him to play like the best Western player on any given day, but I'm not confident that Caps is going to come in and be this top 10 mid lane threat from start of year to end of year. We saw even last year, even though I thought that Caps was part of all of the highest highs for G2, he also had some moments, both domestically and internationally, that were not so pretty. I felt like there were some games where he felt like he needed to do too much, and then what would end up happening was that in his attempt to try to like solo win the game for his team, he would end up making some massive game-losing mistake. One that I can point out for an example would be his Oriana game in, I believe it was split 2, either finals or upper bracket finals, I don't remember which one, but G2 had a very favorable position in the game, and then Caps was playing Oriana, and he basically walked into the entire enemy team and died. Like, when I see a play like that, that kind of tells me that it feels to me like a player is kind of experiencing information overload where they're trying to do too much in a game, and based on the way that Broken Blade was playing as well, that was kind of the impression I got from both solo laners, is that they were both trying to do too much for the team and were making an uncharacteristically high amount of mistakes because of it. They fixed it up a little bit for Split 3, and by the time we got to Split 3 playoffs and Worlds, they felt like a more solid, stable team with more of an identity. And then so heading into 2026, I expect G2 to be able to grow as a team and look better and more stable. But I still, because there is precedent for pretty much like every single year for the past 4 years of Caps being on and off, I don't trust him to be able to move him super highly into that kind of like top half LZK or top 5 LPL territory. In 12th, I have my unsigned GOAT Doinby. So Doinby in 2025 was playing for NIP, but because of the player auction that came into the LPL for 2026, Doinby decided that he did not want to go to the auction, and then so he is taking the split off, and what that means is that he will most likely be taking the entire year off, and what that means is that his career is probably sadly over, but technically he is not retired yet, so I'm going to put him on my list anyway. I think that if Doinby was playing this year, this is where I would have him. So Doinby is an extremely high upside player. I feel like he is incredibly smart about the game. I feel like every single team that he joins, they end up improving macro-wise, so I think that Doinby is somebody who has what it takes to lead a team and carry a team. He is also a super creative player. He always has these niche picks that he can pull out to try to surprise the opponent. Doinby would play Lee Sin mid as one of his specialty picks in the past, and 2025 was no different. He was still trying to play Lee Sin mid this year as well, but that is also where my main issue with Doinby comes in, and the reason why I have him all the way as low as I do is because even though I think that Doinby can be one of the best mid laners in the world on his champions, like if he ends up being on one of his special mid picks, or if he ends up getting Rise or Akali, I think that he is absolutely a top tier mid laner and one of the best in the LPL and one of the best in the world. But the problem is that the format right now is a fearless format, and I felt like Doinby got exposed pretty hard in fearless. Not just because his champion pool was limited to begin with, but also because he has not played competitively since 2022. And because of the time that he spent off, he does not have mastery on all of the champions that are currently meta, like some of the control mages that we've been seeing, like the Azir, Talia, champions like those. And the 1 year that he played, it was not enough for him to kind of master those champions to the point where he was comfortable enough to bring them out. So Doinby spent a lot of the year really only being like hyper elite on 2 or 3 champions, proficient on another 2 or 3, and then after that his champion pool was just a black hole, so he would end up being a draft liability for NIP if he got targeted in draft, or if the series ended up going to later games like a game 4 or game 5. So because of that draft inflexibility, that's why I pushed Doinby all the way back to 12th, even though everybody knows me at this point as a huge Doinby fan and believer. Even I have to be realistic. I understand that he has plenty of champion pool issues that make it hard for his team to win. The other thing I do want to point out though is that once again, this was a year where I feel like Doinby's team was not built for him to succeed. I think that he had some very underwhelming players on his team. I didn't think that Niket was LPL level. I thought that Solo Kill was definitely near the bottom of the barrel for LPL top laners. I thought that Nayo at his best was middle of the pack, but if he was having a bad game, he was also down there near the bottom. The only player on Doinby's team who I thought was at even a comparable level to him, and I would still say that I thought that Doinby was better, but the only other comparable player he had on his team would have been Leave. So that team was really just 2 players who I thought were good enough to hold their own in LPL, and then 3 players who were all struggling. So I think that roster was a little bit doomed to fail no matter what, whether Doinby could play all of the champions or not. But of course, Doinby's no stranger to that. Pretty much for most of his prime, he was saddled with rosters of players who were not at his level. So Yeah, that's all I really want to say about DoomB. However, notably, of the mid laners who are unsigned to a team, I don't think that DoomB is actually the best. The person who I think is the best unsigned player right now is in 11th, and that is Fofo, who most recently played for Talon in the LCP and Split 2. So for some people, Fofo might be a weird inclusion on here, especially because I have Fofo higher than HoloCure, which implies that I think that Fofo was a better LCP mid laner than HoloCure. And of course, that's going to be very confusing for some people because, you know, HoloCure, he was definitely the best mid laner in Split 3. And over the entire course of the year, I think you would say that HoloCure was the best LCP mid laner in 2025. But that's because Fofo did not play in Split 3. Fofo was replaced by Maple in Split 3, and it was this really weird situation where I feel like the team misdiagnosed what their issue was, and they wanted to put faith in Maple because Maple is a player who historically is one of the greatest of all time for the PCS, if not the greatest of all time for the PCS. And he's somebody who, he carries a reputation of always being able to take his teams to an international tournament. And the problem with Talon was that when they had Fofo, they barely missed out on international tournaments both times. They got second in Split 1 and third in Split 2, so they didn't go to first stand or MSI, even though that was the expectation for the team, was that they would be able to go to all of the tournaments. So heading into Split 3, Talon made the big decision to drop Fofo and sign Maple. And while I think it was a massive downgrade, I think that they completely misdiagnosed their issues, and it looked like at first they were going to get punished for it because the team lost their first 8 games in a row. I can't really say anything because at the end of the day, PSG did manage to rally and win 9 games in a row after their initial loss streaks. That way they could qualify for Worlds as the 3rd seed. So you know what? If signing Maple is just the key to making it to an international tournament, then whatever, I guess it worked for them. But what I want to point out is that I think that in Split 1 and Split 2, when Fofo was playing, I think he was better than HoloCure. And I know that that's going to be a hot take because HoloCure is a very promising player. He has a lot of fans. Fofo does not have a lot of fans because he's a terrible person. But what I would point to as my personal example for why Fofo is just fundamentally a better mid laner than HoloCure right now would be the upper bracket 5-game series in playoffs of Split 2 of LCP, where we got to see Talon play against CFO. In my opinion, in that series, Fofo was better than HoloCure in all 5 games. And I think that in some of the games, it wasn't even close, and Fofo was completely blasting HoloCure. And then in other games, even if Fofo wasn't playing well, I thought that in those games, HoloCure was also either not playing well or was actively playing badly. So when push comes to shove, regardless of the fact that CFO won that series, I watched that series and I came away thinking that Fofo was better in all 5 games. And then so what that tells me is that Fofo is still, just based on the experience he has and the champion pool that he has and the innate mechanical talent that he has at the moment, he is just a more consistent and a more reliable mid laner than HoloCure has reached at this point, at least. I want people to remember that that pretty much like every single year that we do manage to see Fofo in LPL, he ends up playing like a top 5 mid laner in that region. He was on a super promising EDG roster that were tied first in regular season, and then ended up doing not as great in playoffs, but the team was projected to be super dominant that year, and Fofo was definitely a strong player on that team. He was one of the best players on the Rare Atom roster. The main issue with Fofo, other than his out-of-game shenanigans, is that in-game, he is a very high resource player. If you're going to have him on your team, you have to play through him. He's going to demand that you play for his lane and let him take on a high damage share for the team. And then so sometimes that can lead to ego battles where if there are multiple players on the team who want to carry, then they'll just end up fighting each other over who is supposed to be the most important person. But if you have the type of team where you're willing to play through your mid laner and you're willing to give him the resources and let him carry, I think that Fofo is a fantastic fit for a team like that, and that he's a very good carry player. So that's why I pushed him all the way up above DoomB, and that's why I think that Fofo is currently the most skilled unsigned player that we have at the moment. In top 10, I have Closer, who is going to be the mid laner for DNF. It's kind of crazy. I feel like Closer is this player who has a ridiculous amount of talent and everybody knows that he's really good, but despite that, he keeps on being passed around like nightmare blunt rotation style between all of the lower tier trash LCK teams. Like, I feel like he can't catch a break. He can't find himself on a good team to save his life. He was on Bro and now he's on DNF, and I don't think things are going to look any better for him. I would be surprised if that DNF TF roster places any better than like 8th. I expect him to be elo held and for him to be the best player on that team again. But I think that closer is I mentioned it earlier, he's a super mechanically talented player. He can play just about everything. I think that on any given night, he can hold his own in lane and in team fights against any other mid laner in the LCK. It's hard to get a grasp of just how good closer is, because I feel like we won't know until he's actually on a good team, which at this rate, it seems like it will be never. But based on what I've seen in the games that he's losing, he always looks impressive. He always looks like he has a lot of talent. So yeah, I'm buckled in for closer to just be miserable for another year, but I like him a lot. I think that he's going to be really strong no matter what. In 9th, I have Showmaker. Showmaker has had a very volatile last few years. In my opinion, the last time that Showmaker was truly elite in the way that we think of like the legendary Showmaker would have been at Worlds 2022, but I think that like even in regular season 2022 he wasn't that impressive, and in 23 and 24 he was kind of slipping. He was not the Showmaker that we all knew and loved and were expecting. In 2025 he showed flashes of being really good. So in Split 1 I thought that Showmaker looked great on DK. It felt like we were getting the original Prime Showmaker back. He was picking whatever champion he wanted to play and hard carrying all of the games and stomping all of his lanes. But the DK honeymoon phase really only lasted for that Split 1, because after that, in Split 2 and Split 3, they reverted back to a standard middle-of-the-pack LCK team, and Showmaker kind of drifted out back to a middle-of-the-pack LCK mid laner. I still think that Showmaker will be a middle-of-the-pack LCK mid laner, but I know that a lot of people think that Showmaker is completely washed and dog shit. I still think that Showmaker has some elite skill sets. I think that he is still a very good laner. Most of the time that he's laning against the top half mid laners, it feels like he's able to play out the matches properly and get the advantages he's supposed to get. Most of Showmaker's problems have been coming mid and late game, so at least for the first half of the game, I think that Showmaker is still at a top half elite level in the LCK. And then for the mid and late game stuff, even though he has those problems, I am a little bit hesitant to think that he's just lacking the ability to play mid and late game, because in past years, he was a fantastic mid and late game player. It felt like he was always the person who could step up and make the big moment happen so that way his team could win. And we also know that the team was having a lot of internal issues last year with their coaching staff. There were players who were not in the mood to play. There were players who were not on speaking terms with different coaching staff. So I think that you can pin some of the mid and late game macro stuff on that, because if the entire team is dysfunctional, then of course nobody's going to be able to play macro properly. DK are keeping the same head coach, so there is a chance that the team just continues to have the exact same communication and backroom problems that they were having in 25. But new year, clean slate. I still want to believe that Showmaker can be good, especially because I think that the DK roster looks a lot more promising this year than it did last year, so I'm rooting for his success. I think that he will either be pretty good, or bare minimum, he will be somebody who can still be a reasonably solid early game laning player and then make a few mistakes later on. I think that would be like his floor, is no matter what, I still think he will be passable in lane, and that's enough to push him up at least a bit. In 8th, I have Xiaohu, who is going to be the mid laner for Weibo. Weibo was a very odd team last year. They were super up and down. Sometimes it looked like they were super cohesive and really together and had these beautiful early and mid game plans to get their leads, and then other times it felt like they would completely collapse and would be terrible. I think that one of those times that they collapsed was towards the back half of Split 3 and Split 3 playoffs. I do think that realistically, Weibo should have been a team that could have fought for a top 4 spot, but it felt like by the time that we got towards the end of playoffs and when we were getting into regional gauntlet, it definitely felt like Weibo was for sure only like a 6th place, maybe 5th place team. And then of course they ended up getting blasted by JDG, and JDG ended up 5th. So, you know, by the time we got to the end of the year, it felt like the dream of getting to Worlds was super far out of Weibo's grasp to begin with. But the highs that we've seen from this roster, and specifically the highs that I've seen from Xiaohu, make me want to believe in him heading into next split. I think that he had some games where he was super dominant and playing very well. There was one game in Split 2, I could be misremembering, but I believe it was an Ari game where he just navigated the entire game super well, and it felt like he was in full control and was the best player on the Rift in that game. And and the ability to remain with that high of a ceiling for this long makes me want to respect him and say that he still has it in him to be one of the best mid laners in the region. Another thing that's pushing up Xiaohu all the way to 4th in the LPL on my list is because I do think that the LPL mid lane pool is experiencing a little bit of a slump right now. In the past few years, like in the early 2020s, the LPL mid lane pool was much better because that was when Scout was at the top of his game, Doomb was in his prime, Rookie was still incredibly dominant. So you had these players who really felt like they were top tier players at the top of the list, but now all of those players are playing a little bit worse. Like Scout had the week 25, Rookie had the week 25, Doomb is pretty much not in the league. Like he was out in 23 and 24, and then in 25 he was riddled with the middle of the pack team. And instead we have these other players who are coming in and kind of filling out that top 3 mid lane spot, which include newer talents like Shanks and Cream. But the issue is that I just don't think Shanks and Cream are at the level of the old Rookie, Doomb, Scout type of quality that we had before. So even though it's weird to see Xiaohu all the way up here, even though he is not in his prime at the current moment, I think that when you consider the fact that the LPL mid lane pool as a whole is just weaker than it usually is, that's kind of where it makes sense that Xiaohu is as high within the LPL as he is. In 7th, speak of the devil, I have Cream. So Cream is a player who is mostly a melee mid specialist, so his best champions are champions like Yone, Akali, Sylas. Sometimes he can even whip out something like Yasuo. And in the past, Cream's biggest issue as soon as he joined Top Esports was that Top Esports really wanted him to be able to play the fundamentally common mages, so they wanted him to be able to play Azir and Orianna and Talia and those types of picks. And the problem is that it was just not clicking for Cream. Those are not the types of champions that he excels at, and it felt like he was kind of at a loss for how he wanted to navigate those games. This year, I think he got slightly better at it in 2025. I still don't think he's an elite mage player. I really don't. Like, I think that when you watch him play either Azir or Orianna or Talia, I think that he's like passable, but you can tell he's not fully comfortable on it. Whenever he can get his hands on one of those melee assassins or Yone, he still looks really good. If he ends up getting one of those champions, he can completely pop off in a game and carry. But if you're going to be on a team who is contending for domestic titles like Top Esports, you have to be able to play more meta threats than just like the fun, volatile melee mids. And I still feel like Cream has yet to grasp fully how to pilot those. The one mage that I do think that Cream is super elite on is Hui. In my opinion, Cream is the best play of all time. I think he has like some ridiculous record on it. He might be like 16-1 on the pick or something like that. Like, to me, that's felt like the one mage that kind of naturally clicked for Cream, and he can play that at an elite level. So that's cool, but Hui is a champion who just does not show up in the meta all that often. He has to be in a really good spot and has to have really good matchups in order for him to pop up. So even though Cream is really good at it, I don't think it's that valuable of an asset to have. And then so even though he's got some highs with the assassin mids and he can have really good mechanics, Cream is not somebody who really instills that much confidence in me anymore. So it makes me want to put him a little bit lower on my list than maybe you would want from a top 3 LPL mid. I also expect Top Esports to struggle a little bit, at least in split 1. They're having some interesting roster issues. So they have Nayo in jungle. Jackie Love is deciding to take split 1 off, so they're going with Jiachi for their ADC. And then they're also they dropped Hong, so they're going with their academy / challenge. I don't know. I don't remember what it is in the LPL. I'll just say academy. Whatever. They're tier 2 support. Very, very experimental roster for the split 1. I expect Top Esports to struggle because the only returning players they have for that split 1 are going to be 369 and Cream. But despite that, I still think that Cream is he's like solid enough on the mages and then elite enough on the volatile mids that I'm still willing to put him in my top 10. In 6th, I have Shanks. If we were talking about split 2 and MSI Shanks, I would probably have Shanks in my maybe like top 4. I could see myself pushing him all the way up there. He is super good on most of the kind of battle mage scrappy champions, so he's pretty good at Rise. Cassio, I like his Orianna a lot, which can sometimes be a champion where you need to have a higher damage profile in order to find success. So Shanks, he definitely does have a specific style of champion where I feel like he's one of the best in the world, and I do think that he was one of the best mids in the world in that split 2 and MSI run. I think that he was for sure a top 3 mid laner at MSI. Maybe even I saw people arguing that he should be top 1. That's not really what I thought at MSI. I would not have had Shanks top 1. I would have had him either 2nd or 3rd. But if you wanted to make the argument during that time period, you could. The main issue for me and the reason why I pushed Shanks down to 6th was because his split 3 was pretty rough. AL was having a lot of issues in Split 3, and most of those issues, in my opinion, were surrounding the performance of Shanks and Kyle at the time. And while Kyle had a nice glow up for Worlds, I thought that Kyle was playing way more like a Split 2 self when he got to Worlds. Shanks, I still was not super comfortable with his level of play. I didn't think he ever got back to the same highs that he was at before. Coincidentally, his performance dip happened right at the same time that controversy happened. Basically, for those of you who don't know, Shanks was involved in a controversy with like 5 other LPL pro players where they were all just going on these like super misogynistic and racist rants online in the midst of an argument with some people over the validity of women in sex work and stuff like that. So that entire thing happened. It kind of, at least like PR wise, blew up in the face of those 6 pro players. And then right after that incident happened, that was basically immediately when Shanks' performance dropped, and he never recovered since. So because he was never able to recover from that, I'm not going to push him into my top 5 at all. Quite frankly, I think that there is a pretty sizable gap between the top 5 and that number 6 spot. If I was doing this on a tier list, I would definitely have Shanks and Cream in a tier below who I have in 5th. In 5th, I have Zeka. I spent a brief period of time wanting to put Zeka in 4th. Like, Zeka is a player who I really believe in. I think, for example, in Split 1 and First Stand, that Zeka was either a top 2 or top 1 mid laner in the world for that stretch of time. I think that when Zeka is on fire, he is just the best mid laner in the world, and it's very much like a confidence thing. I feel like Zeka is a super streaky player. He goes through these phases where he just feels like he has it in him. He feels like he has that special quality and is the best mid laner in the world. And then he also goes through these phases of like semi-mediocrity, where he's just fine and not necessarily special. And then so for me, when I was thinking about my 2026 projections list, it mostly depended on how Zeka did at Worlds, because Zeka, I feel like his performance slowly got less and less impressive as the year went on. So in Split 1, I thought he was arguably the best. Then in Split 2, he dropped to maybe like 2nd place or 3rd place territory. But then by the time that we got to Split 3, he was absolutely in like 3rd, 4th, and was not a player who was inspiring much confidence. So heading into Worlds, I still had faith that he could be really good, but the Zeka that we got at Worlds was definitely not special by any means. He had a couple of notably super bad games, like he had a game against AL in Swiss stage where he just forgot to buy tier on Rise, and that singular purchase was the primary reason why they lost a huge team fight on Otacon and ended up losing the game. So that's something that will stick in a lot of people's memories. I think that when HLE really needed somebody to step up and carry a game, Zeka was not the person who was ever able to do that. He felt very invisible in big moments, I would say. And so because Zeka did not prove to me that he belonged like in top 3 LCK conversations at Worlds, I made the call that I decided that I'm not going to put him in top 3 for my 2026 projections, and instead I'm going to leave him at 5th. In 4th, I have Faker. Faker is somebody who in the past I have very openly been willing to criticize. He has had multiple stints in the past recent memory where he's been a draft liability depending on what champions are actually strong or not, or how hard he's being focused in draft. He can sometimes make these really questionable mistakes in games. Like, I feel like Faker, more so than most of the other elite mid laners, can find himself dying on these super odd timers, losing T1 tempo in moments that T1 should never be losing tempo in. Like whether it's Faker just dying to a really obvious gank, or whether he's getting solo killed or traded super hard on in a matchup that should be going even, or if he's just dying on side lane for no reason when an objective is spawning. Whatever the case is, Faker is a player who has some weird moments in games where he just dies or loses crazy amounts of tempo at odd times. But despite that, of course, there is that Faker X factor that's always in there, which is the fact that it feels like whenever you get to these super tense moments, or most/all of the mid-late game team fights, or if you need one player on the team to step up, it feels like Faker can always be the person to make that moment happen. We saw it happen a crazy amount of times at Worlds. Like, T1 were really struggling in Swiss stage. I know that T1 ended up winning Worlds, but I have to stress that T1 were struggling in Swiss stage. There were moments where it was questionable if they were even going to get out. I think that the draw that they ended up getting for rounds 4 and 5 was an easy enough draw for them that they were comfortably in. But even in those series against MKOI and 100 Thieves, T1 had plenty of lowlights. I thought that everybody on the team was struggling with the exception of Faker. I thought Faker was the best player at Worlds 2025 this time around, which is something that I don't say lightly because, like I mentioned before, I'm very open to criticizing Faker. I have no problem with placing him way lower than some of the other people who make LoLEsports content on this platform. So, like, if I'm saying that I thought that Faker was the best mid laner at Worlds, then he was probably the best mid laner at Worlds, like, because I'm probably the last person who would say something like that. But Faker, he was just absolutely fantastic at this Worlds. I thought that he had a good series against IG. I thought he was the best performing player in Swiss stage. His Talia looked amazing. Pretty much every time he picked Talia, it was an instant win. Anytime he would pick Orianna or Azir, it was an instant win. Once we got to knockout stage, he started piloting Mel, and I thought that his Mel game 5 against AL, I thought that Mel performance was the best individual performance that we saw at the entire tournament. I thought that when we got into grand finals, he had a really strong Anivia game, definitely the best Anivia game at the tournament. So for me, yeah, Faker, I mean, like, he was just disgustingly insane at Worlds. I thought that he was really good. And then so even though normally I would never have Faker in my like top 3 mid laners heading into an LCK preseason, this time around I'm finally ready to just stop downing him. I'm gonna put him in my top 3 kind of for the first time in a while, really, that I'll have Faker on a top 3 domestic LCK list. But yep, that's kind of how I view it right now. He played so well at internationals last year that it's undeniable at this point that he's still got it in him to be one of the best or the best in the world. So 4th for me, 3rd in LCK for me. That's it for Faker. In 3rd, I have BDD. BDD has been pretty consistently a very strong mid laner in LCK for the entire year. Even the mid laners who were considered better than him at times, like Zeka was considered better than him in Split 1, Chovy was better than him in Split 2, Faker was better than him at Worlds. I think that even though BDD probably, honestly, if I'm thinking about it, there was probably no point in 2025 where BDD was the best Korean mid laner. I think that would be fair to say. But despite that, he was pretty much always there in the conversation. Like, he was always floating either 2nd or 3rd, and he was always able to contest everybody. I thought that on KT, BDD had the biggest responsibility to carry that team. And I mean, they made it to grand finals, and it was, of course, the KT run to grand finals was in part because Peter was playing the best league of his life, Perfect was playing the best league of his life, Cuz was stepping up and playing very well. So all of the pieces around BDD did rise to the occasion, but I don't want that to take away from the fact that BDD did have a very strong Worlds as well. I thought that he was a super elite mid laner at Worlds. I really liked how he looked in Split 3 playoffs as well. I thought that he played super well in the series where KT upset Gen G in the domestic playoffs, that best of 5, that shocked everybody. Thought he played really well there. So I regard BDD very highly. I think that he has at least 6 or 7 different champions that are pretty meta right now that he can pilot extremely well. So I never have problems with him in terms of draft or the fearless format or flexibility or anything like that. So yeah, BDD, just super solid player, very high ceiling, really good at carrying games. My one gripe with BDD, I guess I would say, would be that I'm not confident that KT will actually be good this year. They have this new bot lane where they're going with aiming and ghost support, and then their backup support, if ghost ends up sucking, I believe is Palu. And it's like, okay, so either we're gonna have ghost support, which I have no expectation of, or if ghost support sucks, then great, we have the 10th place support Palu. Like, I mean, Palu didn't place 10th, but in my opinion, Palu was the worst support in LCK last year. So just once again, we're getting into the situation where I don't trust KT's top laner and I don't trust their bot duo, and I feel like BDD may definitely get elo held again, and so that might impact how much he can flourish and grow. But yeah, even if that ends up happening, BDD is no stranger to being elo held. He has spent multiple years, not just 2025, he has spent other years being the one lone elite player on his team while the rest of his team are full of these like bottom tier stinkers. Actually, now that I'm thinking thinking about it, wasn't the roster that BDD was on with Nongshim that placed really badly, wasn't Ghost on that roster as an ADC? Like, I'm pretty sure the last time BDD and Ghost played together, it was a year where BDD was mega elo held, and then the team placed really badly. So I'm kind of surprised that BDD and Ghost are willing to run it back, especially with Ghost on a role swap. But yeah, I mean, that doesn't even matter. That's just a random side tangent. Yeah, BDD third for me. I think he deserves a super high placement. In second, I have Knight, who's going to be the mid laner for BLG. The first thing to point out for Knight is that I think that the roster that he is on is going to be super strong, which means that I feel like he is going to have an easier time playing to the best of his ability. Instead of needing to deal with the gaping black hole in the jungle situation that was the back and forth between Beichuan and Shadow, he's going to be reuniting with Shun, and Shun is one of the best. And then in the bot lane position, they're getting Viper, and Viper is just, I mean, he's one of the all-time great bot laners. He was probably the most consistently elite bot laner for the entirety of 2025. So I think that the team should be looking to be more consistent next year, and that is going to be a big benefit for Knight. I think that Knight, in terms of the mid lane pool that we have right now, I personally consider Knight to be the most flexible mid laner in terms of his champion pool. Knight, he is somebody who has never quite been able to grasp how to play an elite Azir, and in fact, in past years, I would say that he was so bad at Azir that it was completely unpickable, and if the team ever picked it for him, then it was just an auto loss. This year, I do think he had a couple of fine Azir games, but I still don't think Azir is a champion that he's necessarily super comfortable with, that he can play at an elite level. But if you take Azir out of the equation, pretty much every single mid laner that you could ever want him to play, he plays at a fantastic level, and that is just something that is very rare. Like, I think that most players have somewhere between 6 to 10 champions that they can pilot effectively. Knight is the type of player who has like 14 or 15 champions that he can pilot effectively at any given moment, and that's just something that is super rare. So Knight, he gets a lot of props for that. The other thing that I want to point out, apart from the fact that he was the best mid laner in LPL for pretty much the entire year, was that I felt that even though BLG underperformed heavily at Worlds, and that Knight also underperformed at Worlds, I did think that Knight was definitely the best player on BLG for their 2025 Worlds shit show. So do with that information what you will. Like, I think that the BLG 2025 Worlds performance reflects poorly on all 5 of them, but that the player that is the least affected by that is Knight. Like, Knight at least had some flashes of having good games. Like, he had a LeBlanc game where he was able to take over. He had Ziggs games that did not look bad. So yeah, no blemishes, no major blemishes from him from that Worlds performance. And then I do think that he was a top 2, top 3 mid laner for the rest of the year. So I expect him to be able to keep that heading into 2026, especially since the pieces around him on the roster are more stable. Then finally in first, and this is probably going to end up being a controversial placement, but it really shouldn't be. In first, I have Chovy, who is going to be the mid laner for Gen G. I've said this before in past videos, that I believe that when Chovy is in form, he is the best player in the world, and also plays League at the highest level that we have ever seen in the history of the game. And whenever I say that, I feel like people always get really weird about it. But this time, I'm coming at you guys with the receipts. I have a specific series that I want everybody who's like lower on Chovy to go watch. In my opinion, the highest quality series that we saw in 2025 was the Road to MSI playoffs in LCK. It was Gen G versus HLE. That best of 5, I thought that was the highest quality series that we saw all year. And in that series, I thought that Chovy was definitely the best player out of the 10 players that were there. So I would recommend that you guys go and watch that series from Chovy. I thought his Talia game in Game 1 was really good. I thought his Twisted Fate in Game 4 was phenomenal. Thought his Zoe in Game 5 was really good as well. So those are just a couple of examples that I can point out for specific things. If you want to see Chovy at his highest highs, then go watch those. It feels like when Chovy is playing at his best, he just refuses to lose. It feels so intimidating and so impossible to win against him when he's in form. However, I will give the Chovy haters this. I do absolutely think that Chovy should have been in a position to win Worlds this year, and he was the one who choked it. In past years, at international, not not even international tournaments, because Chovy's always been fine at MSI, but at Worlds, the issues that Chovy's been having with his Worlds performances, in past years, I almost never thought that it was Chovy's fault. I usually thought that it was because other players on his team were playing really badly, but this time around, 2025, this is the first one that I'll give you guys where yes, it was definitely Chovy who was the one who played really badly. In their series loss against KT in semifinals, he had at least 2 games where he was just absolutely playing really bad. So this is like the one time where I'm kind of on board with the whole entire idea that like Chovy's a choker narrative. So I'm okay with that. So if you're skeptical about him for that, then fine. I think there's even more cases of that. The series that he played against KT domestically in that summer playoffs that they ended up losing, I thought that that was also a very bad series for Chovy. Although to his credit, I thought that he rebounded and was playing very well for the rest of playoffs after that, as Genji would go on to win the title. But yes, there were multiple cases of Chovy being inconsistent and being weaker or choking in big moments. But for the most part, because of how amazing he's looked when he and his team are on fire, and because of the fact that I thought that he spent a good portion of the year as the best player in the world, that portion being split 2 regular season and heading into MSI, I thought that there was a large argument that he was the best player in the world for that entire stretch of time. Because of that, I still have Chovy comfortably in my number 1 spot, and I would be projecting him to be once again the best mid laner in the world for 2026. So there you go. That's my mid list. Let me know if you guys have any different placements that you think, anything that you agree or disagree with. Let me know what you thought. If you think that there are any honorable mentions that should have made the list, or if there are any players who didn't even show up on my honorable mentions list that you want to bring up that you think that maybe I forgot about or didn't think about hard enough. So let me know about all of that. If you want to support me and my channel more, you can check out my Patreon. The link to that will be in the description. My Patreon has 3 tiers. Each of them come with various amounts of benefits, like behind the scenes content, scripts, drawing sessions. If you subscribe to the $10 tier, I'll even draw you a custom Poro, which you can see on this Patreon graphic that's showing right now. But with that, that's all I have for you guys for this video, so I'll see you all next time. Bye!